This Freedom Day calls are again being made for women to be recognized for their role in liberating South Africa. Many have argued that the contribution of women in the struggle for our democracy has not been given the due attention. So how do we do better? To help us answer that question, we can now speak to Dali Tambo, CEO of the National Heritage Project. He joins us now in studio. Good afternoon to you. So you have been quite outspoken about the apparent neglect of the role of women in our struggle for liberation. What has moved you so much to take on this cause?
I suppose it's because whether I was doing the history of the ANC, six-part documentary series, or our current project, which is to tell the story of the history of South Africa through statues, through representations, sculptural representations of our people, going through the 350 years from the 1600s to 1994, one notices the invisibility in what is a very patriarchal historical narrative. So we made a deliberate effort to speak about the women who were often the home guard, who didn't have the same role as their men, but were vital, who were activists. And whether you're talking about our country with Albertina Sisulu's, Winnie Mandela's, Lillian Ngoyi's, Charlotte Maxeke's, etc., all of these women are symbolic of normal, everyday women who fought alongside their families, who gave their children to our struggle, generation after generation. And it's very important that they're recognized. In the last 30 decades, I think, in revolutions across the world, the role of women has been more examined. I mean, in the United States, George Washington took part in the revolution there. His wife was an activist, a women's rights activist, and that's been the case across the world.
Let me ask you this then, Dali, why is it that you mentioned the likes of Ruth First,
Yes.
women whose stories are well documented if you look for them?
Sure.
And the Winnie Mandelas, the Albertina Sisulus, the Adelaide Tambos, why is it that we know their names but their stories have never really been made to take center stage? Do you think it was deliberate?
No, I think it's an omission on our part in various mediums, in literature, in film, in television. For some reason, our historians have not come to the fore, in many cases, to tell those stories. And yet you can't understand the South African Revolution, the South African struggle, without understanding the role that those women played. Now, some women, like Ruth Mompati, were full-time revolutionaries. Others had to handle children, family, financial issues, and still attend to the revolution and support their husbands in their task. Many of them played intelligence roles, spying for the revolution, giving messages, information, etc., shielding MK guerrillas. So they played a massive role. And I think it's important that we recognize that role, both in sculpture, so that we remember them in public memory, but also in terms of academics. Another thing that we haven't done since 1994 is to make history a compulsory subject in our schools. So we have generation after generation who were denied that history by apartheid, and since 1994 have been denied the learning of that history. So it's a catch-up thing. It'll happen. We have started to recognize quite a few, but there are many, many more, and beautiful stories of sacrifice, of motherly love, not just for the children of that family, but for the movement as a whole.
Let's speak about the women who were the homemakers, if you will, the ones who helped hide MK members who were in exile over the various years. Is it your sense that in our transition to democracy, respectability politics were perhaps part of why certain women got favor over others? You think of Winnie Mandela, for example, you think of Ruth Mompati. I mean, they were at the forefront of fighting for our liberation. And perhaps they're given more respect, and those who stayed home are seen as having played less of a role. How do we debunk that?
I think only through the personal biographies and stories of those families, and by having a deliberate attempt to tell those stories. It is part of our national narrative. This country would be nothing without those women. Even the white community, Black Sash, Congress of Democrats, etc., the role of Helen Suzman in Parliament, all of these people contributed. But specifically to your point, yes, it's true that the prominent wives of revolutionaries will take the fore. But we have to tell the stories of those who were there alongside them. They're symbolic. Winnie Mandela is symbolic of millions of women who went through exactly the same thing.
But just on Winnie, you look at her, for example, in the days after her passing last year, there was a more of a critical analysis of how she had conducted herself. So I suppose in the storytelling, we also have to guard against things like judging women revolutionaries far harsher than we do men.
Exactly, because, you know, they have a lot of other things to deal with, and they don't have their men with them. They still have the oppression and repression of the apartheid regime. They still have their husbands in jail, in exile, etc., etc. So the hypercritical attitude, I think, is unfortunate. I think we've first got to examine the circumstances that they lived in and their everyday, because it's an everyday thing for women. My mother used to say the woman holds the knife by its sharpest end, and that's very true. We for generations, 350 years, have been in a struggle. We had a Holocaust in South Africa, and many of our women were instrumental in us defeating colonialism and in defeating apartheid.
You've also made an appeal for both the public and private sector to help you in this project as we try to memorialize the various women. Has that call been heeded?
It has, to an extent. We've had a slow last 2 years, but we have 100 statues of liberation icons going back to the 1600s, as I say. They're all walking, they're all in a procession, and it varies from era to era. But these are the salt of the earth of the South African nation, and in each one there are many stories that are being told. So we urge South Africans, we're at Marapeng, it's 100 statues, it's the world's biggest display of sculptural representational bronzes anywhere in the world, and it's the biggest display of Africans represented in sculpture anywhere in the world. So it's the story of the people of South Africa stretching over these generations and showing the committed, selfless, dedicated leadership that we had throughout all those years. It's a beautiful thing to see, and it's really beautiful to see our people interact with these sculptures, the emotion that comes out. Some will cry, some will laugh and do what the statue is doing, others will sing songs, etc. It's beautiful, and you know, a good sculpture, well maintained, will be there for 300 years plus. So we expect that 50 years from now, 100 years from now, young children will visit this monument, it'll be bigger then, and understand their story, understand where they and their family and their ancestors came from, and revel in it, feel proud, feel strong, know that they have great lineage, that they come from heroes and heroines.
Dadi Tambo, thank you so much for your time. Dadi is the CEO of the National Heritage Project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,